In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this rather large but I think rather elegant tote bag. I've called it a no frills type of tote bag because it doesn't have pockets, it doesn't have any zips or anything like that, but you could add those if you wanted to. I've used a canvas fabric so it's got a really nice weight to it, and my interfacing or stabiliser is a Decovil Light. You could use a foam or a fleece if you wanted to instead, but this gives the bag a structure, but it's not too chunky. Fastens over with a magnetic snap. If you wanted to put a button on there or use Velcro instead, then that's fine, that's entirely up to you. But you've got a good size of bag for work, for carrying files, for a baby bag, for a weekend away, and what a lovely gift that would make for somebody as well. But it is so simple to make, I'm sure even a beginner is going to be able to make this within a day. Let's get sewing. So I've got my 2 pieces of the pattern canvas and 2 pieces of plain canvas, and I'm going to join these right sides together. Again, look at all of your measurements in the description box underneath the video, and all of your measurements are going to be in there. And I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance and just sew those together. Do be aware of directional fabric and make sure that your print is the right way up if you are using a directional print. This one isn't, so it doesn't really matter, but just to make you aware that things like that can happen. And I'm literally going to sew all the way down the edge, and we do that with both pieces. Then I like to top stitch as well, so I'll do that in just a second. It just adds an extra little bit of detail to it. So let's do that, and then I'll press the seam open. Like so. And canvas is a really nice weight to make bags out of. As I said before, I am going to use some Decovil Light for this one, but even though it's a good strong fabric, I would still add some kind of interfacing or stabiliser, something to give it a little bit more stability, because it's still quite a floppy bag and I want it to be reasonably rigid. So I'm now going to top stitch along each side of that seam. So I can lengthen my stitch. I'll go up to 2.8 on this one, and I'm just using the edge of my foot as a seam guide and just sew along both sides. If you have a decorative stitch on your sewing machine, that might be quite nice to use here, or a contrast colour thread so the stitches really stand out, would look good. I'm just using the same colour as my fabric for this one. It still stands out quite a lot, but it just gives it more of a shop bought look. There's a few things you can do, like adding metal hardware. I think always works to give you a professional finish to a bag as well. So that's one side finished, and then I'll need to do the same with the other side. My Decovil Light is going to go on the wrong side. If you haven't used this before, it feels quite leathery, but this is the light version. There is a heavy version available as well, which is quite a bit stiffer. You can use either for this bag. You could also use something like a Bosal single-sided fusible foam. Only go for the single-sided one with this style of bag, otherwise you won't be able to turn the lining through. Or you could use a Valiseline H640. That would give you quite a soft bag. I'm aiming for something a little bit firmer. So if you haven't used this before, the shinier side is adhesive, so when you apply heat from your iron, it glues the stabiliser to your fabric. Just bring up my ironing board and we'll do that. So normally do this at a bigger ironing board. So let's put this over the top. Just line up the edge there and then press it. You can use steam with this. I'm not going to actually touch the Decovil with the iron, so I don't want to get glue on the bottom of my iron. If you're using any other kind of interfacing, do have a look at the manufacturer's instructions. I know I can use a really hot iron with this fabric, and I can use steam with the Decovil and it's not going to wrinkle. So just take your time with it. You may have to hold the iron there a little bit longer than just a regular cotton quilting weight fabric, because it's a thicker fabric with the canvas and we need the heat to go all the way through. So take your time with this, it's worth it. We do want it to stick all over. And if you do find that you've got wrinkles in your fabric at all, you can, while it's still warm, just peel the backing away and then repress it. I normally like to start like there, a little crease there, I don't know if you can see. I can just pull that away while it's warm. And I like to kind of start somewhere in the centre and bring the iron out to the edge. So I'm smoothing the fabric away from the middle all the time. So I'll go almost up to the edge and then we'll cut this out and then go right up to the edge, so I'm not getting glue on the iron. But just make sure it's stuck down nicely in the centre and wait for it to cool as well before you start sewing anything. So I'm just going to trim this off with scissors. Apologies for the noise of the rain if you can hear that. I didn't want to stop filming because of the weather, but it's quite ferocious with the wind and the rain outside, so I'm not sure if you can actually hear that. But I've turned the volume up a little bit, so hopefully we're drowning out the sound of the weather today. It just seems relentless. So again, I'm just cutting right up to the edge of the fabric. Really easy to cut through, you don't need anything special. You can use your rotary cutter, ruler and mat if you preferred. And now, or just a little bit to trim back there right at the top, because again I don't want to get the glue on this onto the bottom of my iron. So now I can re-iron this right up to the edge. This is going to go within a seam, so don't worry too much about the edge. We just want to make sure mainly that the centre is really stuck down. Actually, if it does lift a little bit as you're sewing, you can go back over it with an iron later on and re-stick it down. But it's pretty firm. It should stay there quite well. So again, like before, that's one side finished. That's just lifted up a little bit there. Then I'll do exactly the same with the opposite side. Now I'm going to bring up my rotary cutter, ruler and mat, and we're just going to shape the sides of this a little bit. So we'll do one piece at a time. And let me square this up with my mat. And I'm going to measure 2 inches from the top. So I'm using the lines on my mat as a guide there. And I'm going to trim this straight the way down to the corner of the fabric. And then the same on this side. So normally I'd stand up for this. So 2 inches across from the top and straight down to the bottom corner. And then do the same with the second piece. So 2 inches to the corner. And same over here. So then I'll need to cut out some lining pieces. So my lining is going to be in the grey. I'm not going to put pockets on this one, but if you wanted to add pockets to the lining, then do so now. If you wanted to add them to the outer, just do this before you piece the whole things together. So let's line that up to the bottom, and then just use this as a template to cut out 2 lining pieces. And if you haven't got a rotary cutter, ruler and mat yet, I do suggest that you invest in one. For cutting straight lines like this, you can't get more accurate, and it's very quick and very simple when you've had a bit of a practice to do so. Right. So again, no pockets in this one, but you could add a zip pocket or a nice big patch pocket, would look good at the back as well, but I'll leave that up to you. I'm just going to put the handles together, or the straps together, and then we'll have a flap on this as well. So that's my strip of fabric. Again, your measurements, if you refer back to the description box, will be there. And I'll bring up my ironing mat, because we're just going to press this into shape. So fold in half first of all. This is like a big piece of binding we're making. Fold in half and press to mark the centre line. If your fabric is a little bit floppy, Again, for the canvas that I'm using here, I'm not going to put any interfacing on the handle at all. I think it's quite sturdy enough without. Let's fold the centre pieces to the centre. I wouldn't use the Decovil Light or the Decovil Heavy on the handle. I think it would be a little bit too stiff. But you could use an interfacing, maybe a woven interfacing on here would be good. Or even a fusible fleece if you wanted the handle to be really sturdy. But again, thicker fabric like this, I don't think it's necessary. So again, both long edges to the centre. And then I'll fold this in half and press it again. If your fabric does fight back a little bit, no harm in giving it a spray of starch or a little bit of best press just to help it to crease. It may not need it, but if you do struggle, if your fabric just wants to bounce back again and not crease at all, then that's your weapon. So fold in half and press. And then I'm going to just top stitch down both sides of the strap. So I've still got quite a long stitch on here because it isn't a seam, this is more of a decorative stitch really. You can afford for the stitch to be a bit longer. And I'm just stitching, I don't know, about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, quite close to the edge. So I'm sewing over the one side where the two folds of fabric are meeting, then I'm going to sew along the opposite side as well, just to add a little bit of symmetry. I think it looks better if you do that. You could sew a few lines down here if you wish, or maybe even another decorative stitch straight down the centre. If you have those stitches on your machine, it might be a nice time to use them. And I've already pressed the second piece. Come to the end of here and we'll go straight on and do the same with the second strap. And then we'll make up the flap. Now I'm not again going to use any interfacing on this one because I've got the canvas which is quite heavy and the flap will be quite soft. If you wanted to add interfacing, again if you're using a finer fabric maybe you'll need to do that on one side. But I think we're fine without on this. I'm just ironing before we get going here. I don't like to work with creased up fabric. Now I'm going to leave my flap square on the ends. If you prefer to curve the points of this, then that's absolutely fine. I'm going to take one part and fold it in half to crease the centre, and this is where I'm going to put the magnetic snap. So I'm just using a 14mm on this one. I'd normally use a larger, but I don't have one to hand. So they're still very strong. So you might have seen this 100 times before, but take the back of the snap, place it about 1 inch from the bottom of the flap, 2.5 centimetres, and just draw through each line. And then you can either use a quick unpick or a sharp pair of scissors to just make 2 small incisions. The smaller the better, because you can always make a smaller cut larger. If you make a large cut, then you could spoil your work. And we'll push the prongs into here. On a finer fabric, you may want to add a little bit of interfacing to the back of this just to strengthen the join a little bit. In you go, push the prongs in through those holes and then pop the back on, and you'll probably find it easier to squish those prongs open than to put them closed. This part's going to go on the bag in just a second. And let's sew the flap pieces right sides together, just around the bottom 3 sides. I don't need to sew across the top. So we'll secure this with a couple of pins. And I'm just using the edge of my presser foot as a seam allowance, which is around about 1/4 of an inch. It may be a little bit bigger. Needle down when we get to the corner, and sew back down again. So out come the pins, then we'll snip across the corners to cut down on the bulk. And then turn this the right side out. So if you have a turning tool, whoops, sorry, just dropped my thread. Use this to just push out the corners so they're nice and square. It's tempting to use your scissors to do this, but invariably you'll go straight through your fabric. Then we'll give this one a quick press, and then I'm just going to top stitch around the edge of this as well. So by leaving an inch from the edge where the magnetic snap went, I know I can get my presser foot around here. When I'm top stitching, if you find that your snap is a little bit too close to the edge to get the presser foot around it, then put the zipper foot onto your sewing machine and use that instead. And that means you'll be able to take the needle further over to the edge of the fabric. Right, so I've got the longer stitch on here still, and around the bottom. This machine that I'm using defaults at 2.4 as its main stitch, as its standard foot. The machine that I use mainly is a 2.2, so those are the two stitch lengths that I use most of all. But if it's top stitching like this, I will increase that slightly. There's the flap. Okay, I'm going to sew this to the back of the bag. The back and the front of mine are exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter. But facing upwards with the magnetic snap up, and I'm just going to measure across the top here just to make sure that that is sitting perfectly in the centre, which it is. And I'm just going to pop a clip in there and then sew quite close to the edge to hold that in place. Then I'm going to place this together with the opposite side of the bag, just so that I can gauge where the flap needs to, where the second part of the snap needs to be. So don't pull this too tight. Maybe leave, I don't know, 1/2 inch or about 1 centimetre as a fold around there. So it's not pulling too tight around the top of the bag. And we'll take the pen, mark where the second half of the snap's going to go. Then I can remeasure this to make sure that it's in the centre, and that is perfect. And then we'll fit the second half of the snap here. So just like before, take the back, place it over the dot, and 2 little incisions each side. If you prefer to use scissors, or you've got a nice sharp pair of scissors, then fold this over where you've made the marks and just do a couple of tiny snips. And push this through. And pop the back on. Let's go back to the side with the flap. And we're going to put the straps just to each side of the flap, so the flap will go through the straps when we're closing it. And we'll clip there. Make sure it's not twisted as it comes around, and sit this one at the same position on the opposite side. and then take the front of the bag and match up the position of the straps. And there, again, make sure it's not twisted. There we go. And then I'm going to sew quite close to the edge on all 4 of those just to hold them in place. So that's within the seam allowance, and I can just take those clips out as I sew, and the same on the opposite side. Then we're going to take the lining, and so this is a quilting weight of cotton I've used for the lining. You could use canvas again if you wanted to. I could have used the same colour canvas as I have on the outside of the bag. I just thought the grey matched it just as well. And we're going to sew these together across the top. So another couple of clips here. And this time I'm going to use about a 1/2 inch or about 1 centimetre seam allowance. So although I've got the interfacing, I've got the handles that I'm sewing over, it's not too much for my sewing machine to go through, and this is just an average sewing machine. You may find it quite useful if you have a walking foot on your machine to help the fabrics or prevent the fabrics from slipping as you're sewing. So that's one side, and then I'll do with the same with the second side of the lining. So let's open this up, and I'm going to pop this right sides together with the back. So it's getting quite big now. Line up the seams here, and again I'm going to clip that. Line up the seams here as well. Whoops. So I'll put a few around here just to hold it in place as I'm sewing. And coming back to this side, line up those 2 seams. It's quite nice when all these seams match, because it's not going to be noticeable. It's the one thing I say quite a lot. A perfectly matching seam is going to go unnoticed, but an ill-fitting seam is going to stand out a mile. I'm not going to pin around the other lining. So I'm going to sew all the way around, but leave a turning gap in one side of the lining. And I like to start sewing at some point where I want those seams to match. So I'm going to start here. And just go all the way around. Now before we turn this the right side out, I'm going to square off the base. So I'm just find that turning gap and open up. Put my hand inside, and I'm just going to squish open the bottom of the bag and fold it until the side seam is sitting on top of the base seam. So you can, oops, you can feel when that happens. I'll just trim off that corner. That's going to make that a little bit easier. There we go. And I'm pushing the seams in opposite directions and just squish this area flat. And let's lay this down. Move the rest of the fabric out of the way that I don't want to see. There's my seams. Then take your ruler and we're going to measure 2 inches from the point. So from the point of where the stitches are, sorry. So there we go here. And I'm just lining up one of the lines on my ruler. So I know that I've got, you can see there, that 45-degree angle. So make sure this is going straight across. And I'm going to draw a line here. Now I'm not going to pin this because it is quite thick. And I'm going to sew straight across the end. And whoops, there we go. So this may seem a little bulky, so just push it out of the way. We're just concentrating on where this sewing line is. Straight across that thick seam and back. And then I'm going to cut that corner off. And we'll do the same with all 4 corners. So again, if it's easier, push your hand inside so that you can push these 2 sides open. It is quite stiff with the Decovil, but it's manageable. I'm just chopping that off again just to help it bend a little bit. Move you out of the way. And then pull this open. I'll have the bottom seam going in the same direction. Crease it so that the seams meet. Measure my 2 inches from the corner. And sew straight across. And cut. And then we'll do the same with the 2 lining pieces. Oh, sorry, the 2 lining corners. This time, because the fabric's a bit finer, it may not crease as easily as the side with the Decovil, so I'm going to hold that with a pin. And just like before, 2 inches from the point, nice straight line, and we'll sew. We'll do that with the other corner as well. Then we can turn it the right side out and we're almost finished. So pop your hand inside and pull the whole thing through. Now, depending on what kind of interfacing you've used or stabiliser you've used, you may find that it creases up, and you can just re-iron those back again, don't worry about that. And as I said right at the beginning, if you're using the Decovil, sometimes it can lift away from your fabric when you're treating it like this, when you're pulling it through. But there's no harm in just re-ironing it with your steam, with your nice hot iron, and just fixing it back onto the fabric again. There we go. I'm just going to put my hand inside and push out the corners. There we go. It is quite stiff, but that's exactly what I wanted it to be like. And then we'll just need to sew the opening closed, the turning up closed in the lining. There we go. So that's the lining side. I'm just going to sew this on my sewing machine. If you're selling a bag or you're gifting it, you may want to hand sew that closed to make it invisible. Normally I would, to be honest, change the colour of my thread so that I've got the same colour thread as the fabric, but just for this demonstration I think I think we're fine with the colour thread I have here. So again, I'm just folding the two edges of the fabric so that they meet, and sew straight over the top. And I'll push the lining inside the bag and we'll give it another press. The top of the bag will have the interfacing folded over, so just be aware of that. So just pull this through and press it into place. See, sometimes it's quite nice to have that border that it creates around the top, but this bag I didn't want that. I want the seam to be right on the top. Do the same at the front. Just move the straps out of the way and pull this so that the seam's at the top. Excuse me, and then we'll press. Let's give everything else a quick press while we're here as well. Things look so much nicer when they've been ironed, don't they? So let's do the other strap. And I wonder if, yes, if you have a tailor's ham, then that might be an idea to just push it inside here, but the size of this bag is just the right size for my little ironing mat. But again, a ham, if you have one, I didn't want to squish the seams flat, so if you've got something like that that you can put inside, or a rolled up towel if you're very careful, then that would work. I can also press the seams, whoops, while I'm here as well. So I'm not pressing the bag so that it's kind of flat and two-dimensional. I'm trying to keep its shape here. If you're using a rolled up towel, just be very careful of your steam, because sometimes it can travel straight through the towel into your hands. And actually you could quite easily make this in a laminated or maybe even a cork fabric would look lovely, but do be aware that those fabrics are waterproof, so therefore steam proof. So if you put an iron inside there, the steam isn't going to come out. You might burn your hands, so just saying. Okay, I'm now going to top stitch all around the top, and that'll make sure again that my lining isn't visible from the front. I'm just going to make sure that's folded in as I stitch. So this time I'm going to take the accessory compartment off my sewing machine, put my stitch length back up to a 2.8. I like to start sewing from somewhere that's not too visible, so maybe over the side seam, and I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch from the top all the way around. So you may have to help your machine over the very thick areas such as the side seams or the straps. Or if your machine really doesn't want to go over them, then you can turn the hand wheel towards you by hand. And I'm just pulling this again so that I've got the seam right on the edge. And I think it's important because it will help to keep the lining in place, but it's another one of those top stitching tricks that give you a shop bought look to your bag. So take your time with this one as well, because you'll see the stitches and they are important. So there, might need another press now. Is my bag finished? Just iron that flap again, I think. Just from the top side. Maybe a little bit of spray. I've got a crease line across there that doesn't seem to want to disappear, so we'll soon have that sorted. That's it. So there's my finished bag. Again, it's kind of a no frills bag. It's nice and big. I mean, it'd be great for taking folders to work, or if you're going away for a weekend or on a city break or something like that, because you can fit so much in here. No frills, as in, like I said before, if you wanted to add pockets on the inside, maybe one on the back, that's up to you. I just wanted to show you a very simple way of making a really pretty but really useful tote bag. So I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and I shall see you again very soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye bye.